Hi, and welcome to our second episode of Bibliophilia. I'm Becca Chavez, and I'm here with Scott Bergstrom, author of The Cruelty.
Bonjour, Becca. How are you?
Hi, French for our book this
That's
time.
right. I have a question. Do you have the revolutionary spirit?
No. Yes,
Yeah,
actually,
you do.
no. I'm very
Yeah.
good at having the revolutionary spirit.
Why is that? What book are we talking about this week?
We're talking about Les Miserables.
Les Miserables.
It's hard to pronounce out loud. Last
It
part.
is.
It's
I
weird.
I
but-
officially give permission to everyone to just call it Les Mis, as we will do for the remainder of the show, probably.
Okay, yes, good idea. And I know that last time we spoke, we were talking a bit about the movie versus the book.
That's right.
And we're going to start this time with a plot outline.
We're gonna give a plot outline of Les Mis, but I think it's important to say right off the bat, what does Les Miserables, what does it mean?
It means the miserable ones.
That's
the
right.
Sad ones. And this
Right.
book is full of sadness.
It is positively dripping with the sadness. It's also a pretty massive book, we have to
yeah.
say. Before you go into the plot here, I want to point out that this is about 1,200 pages. Beck and I both have. I mean, it's like the size of a Manhattan phone directory here. You can see it on the camera, maybe. These are giant. And it's actually, though, it consists of 5 books.
Yeah,
So-
but like, I always hate when they do that. I'm sorry, like, because Pride and Prejudice is 2 volumes, but it's
Right.
just one book. Like,
Right.
it's one story.
This is one
So this is
contiguous
one
story. That
story.
said, it is a massive tome. In French, I understand that it's actually longer. It is like 1,600 pages typically. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah. All right. So for this 1,600-page book, I want to give you a challenge.
Okay.
I want you to recount the plot for our listeners in 2 minutes or less.
can
I'm going
totally
to
do
even
this.
do
I'm
that
gonna
on my
do this.
phone. Watch this. Watch this. Siri, set a timer for 2 minutes.
Okay, 2 minutes and counting.
Oh, right now it's starting already. Okay,
go.
There's a man named Jean Valjean, and he stole a piece of bread to feed his family, and he ends up in prison. He tried to escape a few times, so he gets a longer sentence. He's finally let free, but he's on probation. And there's this guy named Javert who used to be a prison guard there, who really wants to make sure that Valjean fulfills his probation, but Valjean is having trouble finding work, and he has no place to stay because he's a criminal. And then he meets this priest. He tries to steal from the priest. When he's caught and they take him back to the priest, and the priest is like, no, he was given all that stuff, and he was also given these candlesticks. And Valjean goes and makes a different life for himself as the mayor of this little town that is unnamed. And while he's there, he employs a girl named Fantine. Fantine ends up losing her job, not because of anything Valjean did, but she loses her job, which is devastating because she has a child. She becomes a prostitute. She's attacked one day. Valjean finds her. He vows to care for her and get her daughter Cosette and take care of Cosette. But right around that time, Javert shows up, and he's like, "You're the guy. I remember you. How are we doing on time?"
Oh, you have 38 seconds.
Okay, you're the guy, I remember you. And then they chase each other a lot. Like, he chases Valjean a lot to Paris. Fantine dies. Valjean has to pick up Cosette. He chases him to Paris. There's a revolution. And that's the plot. I left off like the
Basically.
whole second half of the book.
Right.
but-
So that's okay. So you have 15 seconds left.
15 seconds, Cosette and
It's-
Marius fall in love.
Right. Because that and Marius fall in love, and Jean Valjean doesn't really like this. He's lived this sort of secret life, and you have to mention the Thénardiers as well.
Oh, yeah. So Cosette was being taken care of by these people called the Thénardiers, who Fantine, it's over. Yeah.
It's over. That's okay. We'll continue.
Fantine found them one day, and it was just this must be a thing that's like very mid 19th century France. Or wait, no, it takes place at the end of
No, it takes place like the first like 1820
yeah.
or so.
So this must be a thing that's special to that time in France, where you see an innkeeper's wife hanging out with her children, and you're like, you can take mine as well. And that's how
Right.
she
And
ends
then
up.
and then she remits some sort of payment
Yeah.
to the Thénardiers. And the Thénardiers actually go then to Paris with on their own, and they come back later in the story, and in a very profound way, they have a daughter
Yeah.
who is sort of when Cosette is living there at their inn outside of Paris, Cosette is very much the inferior of Eponine, and Eponine appears later, and she's in love with Marius, and but Marius is in love with Cosette, and there's this whole awesome love triangle, and in the musical, it's so sad. It just breaks
it's
my
sad
heart.
in the book too.
It is, but it takes some 500 pages.
I know.
To do the
Okay,
story.
so last time we actually talked about how, like at the end of our last episode, we kind of both agreed that you could just watch the movie instead of reading the book, but I have to renege on that.
Yeah, I know you're reneging on that. Here's the thing, though, is that this book, and I was surprised that the book actually contains a lot of information that, as a viewer of the movie, you don't get, but you actually don't miss very much in terms of the core of the plot, and I would say in terms of the theme, that you're not actually missing that much if you just watch the musical.
No, I think that
version.
if you've read the book and then you watch the movie, like everything, you're just, and this is a thing that I want to say, like, those people who are like, oh, I have to read the book before seeing them, you're just setting yourself up for disappointment. Like, don't do that ever. Like, you're just setting yourself up for disappointment. It's never bad. Like, I can name like 2 movies that I thought were better. I think I can name like 1 movie I thought was better than the book. And then the rest are like on par.
Just out of curiosity, what was that one?
Fight Club. I really hated the book Fight Club.
Oh, interesting.
So, okay. But I liked the movie a lot. And, a lot of people will be like, oh, it's word for word, but it's not, because the fat in the book was Marla's mother's fat, and we're not going to get into it, but there are differences.
All right, fair enough. I never read the book. Actually.
Yeah.
But what are the, aside from the book taking 3 months to read versus watching the movie in 2.5 hours, what are the differences? What kind of stuff do they leave out, Becca?
So one of the big things is Valjean's backstory, because in the movie, it's like, oh, he stole a loaf of bread. It's really upsetting. But he stole it for his family. Like, his sister had 6 kids and her husband was gone or dead or something. And so he stole it to feed these children, which makes it that much more tragic. And they also leave out a part where he goes back to prison. Like, after, in the movie, he's caught when Fantine dies. Javert shows up and they do this great song, and then he runs off. But in the book, Javert actually apprehends him and sends him back to prison, and he escapes. He successfully escapes from prison. Right. And
they also leave out, if I remember right, there's a great. Do they have the part in the nunnery in the convent? Is that left out of the movie? I forget.
It's there, but it's so. I mean, here's the thing. Okay, this is one of the things with Hugo, that he does this thing that. Every chapter is set up. It's like divided into these little parts, and every book really, and it all like starts with like a description of the setting, and then how a character felt, and then how another character felt, and then finally at the end of this, you get to what's actually happening, and then it's a cliffhanger, and then you have to go through this whole thing with the setting again. And one of those things that he does is he talks about this convent that Valjean and Cosette end up at, and it is in the movie that they end up at the convent, but it's not gone into in the depth, because they're very weird nuns who are very into like self-deprivation and punishing themselves,
self-sacrifice, and they're quite ascetic, and they live in this. He breaks into this in an effort to escape with Cosette. He breaks into this convent, and as it happens, they're custodian, the one male in the place, the gardener,
is a man he saved.
Right, is the man he saves. Fauchelevent is his name, and he dies, and Valjean takes his place. Cosette is then educated in this convent by these very, very strict nuns. The police come looking for him, but because this is, France, and because this is a convent, and no men are allowed ever, the police can't go inside. They're prohibited from going inside. So basically, Valjean and Cosette live for years in complete isolation in this convent.
That's kind of glossed over in the movie. Like, she's just older one day, and they're hanging out in the street.
There's reason number 1 to read the book if you're very interested in the history of French convents. The book is for you.
Yeah. And then another thing I thought that I thought was significant, but it's a small thing, but I think it's significant, is that Fantine. Okay, so there's this line in the movie, the musical, where she says, in I Dreamed a Dream, she's like, "Oh, he slept a summer by my side. He filled my days with endless wonder." And you think, like, when I heard that, I thought, oh, something really sad happened. Like, maybe he died or something. No, this guy was with Fantine for, like, 2 years about. He knew that Cosette existed. She was about 10 months when he was, like, taken off now. And not only that, he does it in the worst possible way. Fantine, he was friends with 3 other guys, and Fantine was friends with 3 other girls, and they were, like a group of couple friends. But the guys were all like upper middle class. And so when their education was over or something, they were like, "Oh, we're leaving. Oh, this will be fun. This will be a fun joke, you guys, if we just tell the girls we're leaving in this way." So they take all the girls out to dinner and they pay for it, which is nice. But then they say they're like going off to get a surprise. And the surprise is that they're getting in a carriage and leaving the town Fantine lives in forever. That's the surprise.
So tragic
and
awful.
She's got like a 10-month-old baby, and
right.
that's a big one that I think.
But wait, I just want to disambiguate that situation. That's not Valjean that does that.
No, that's
the father.
That's the father of Cosette.
Right.
And he becomes like a great philosopher. And then another big difference.
For those of you keeping score at home, that's an important point that he becomes a philosopher.
No, I don't. Is it?
I think it is, because it shows the corruption of philosophy. That you can still be this awful, jerk of a guy and still become a great philosopher. And, and the hypocrisy, the anti-humanism of his actions.
I can see that. Okay, so that's one, and then I think Thénardier's family, like we said, this is a big difference for me. They went to Paris, and what you find out is in the movie they have Éponine, and right. Éponine's like the daughter, and that's it. And she sings a lot of songs. But in the book, Gavroche is one of their children,
right.
which is super important, and it's not even mentioned. I mean, he's not around much, but he does have significant interactions with his family in the
right.
book that I think are really important. He breaks his father out of jail, and then when he breaks his father out of jail, they're all sitting around, and Mr. Thénardier is like, "Who's that little street urchin over there?" And Gavroche is sitting there like, my dad doesn't know who I am.
right.
What just happened here?
In the movie and in the musical, Gavroche is just he's sort of, when they finally have the revolution, he is the little mascot. He's the little spunky little fighter who's helping them, and of course he gets.
Yeah, I guess we should clarify, because in that musical, I don't feel like they say the names a lot. Like, all the revolutionaries have names, but they don't seem to say them.
And in fact, they have in the book, they have characters. They are much more fully developed than in the movie.
And I think that's one thing too that kind of bothered me about the book to movie thing. This Marius is in the movie. He's played by Eddie Redmayne, and he's all like outside Lamarck's house, inspiring the crowds to be revolutionaries.
Right,
and everything's like really awesome.
Right.
And Tim and Enroles and in Horace. He's got a confusing name, but they're the leaders.
Enjolris.
Yeah, they're the leaders, and he's like but in the book, he is so pathetic. He's
right. He's kind of this meek little hanger-on of Enjolras. I don't know. Is that how you? I have no idea
it's not even that. It's like he met Enjolras one day, and then that guy was like, "Hey, you want to join my revolution?" And Marius was like, "I don't know."
Right.
And then goes and does his own thing. And then the only reason he's at the barricade is because he's brokenhearted about Cosette.
Right.
So those are like some of the big differences that I was like, you have to really read. I mean, I think Éponine is so much more tragic in the book than she is in the movie.
Right.
Because she's not Samantha Barks. They continuously talk about her like she's weathered and she's missing teeth and her cheeks are sunken
she's really,
in.
Yeah, she doesn't have that sort of street urchin gamine look of a model. She looks. She really is pretty beat up. She's missing teeth. She is a homeless person, and for all intents and purposes, she has a home, but she's quite unkempt. It's a very
She's
tragic figure. And here she is in love with this bourgeois Marius.
And it would never happen. It would never happen, not because he doesn't notice her, which is so the like on my own whole thing is like, oh, if only he looked in my direction. But no, he has looked in her direction several times and been like, look at that awful girl who looks like she could be 45 and a grandmother, but is actually 16 years old, and that's too bad.
Exactly.
Not, yeah.
All right, I'm coming around now to your point of view that you need to read the book, but I would still say that it's okay to see the movie or musical first. It's fine.
Yeah, totally do it because you don't want to set yourself up for disappointment. Like I said, you don't want to just be disappointed by this movie.
So, what do you think? One of the reasons that Les Mis has been such a mainstay of Western literature because of some of the themes that it brings up. And I think that it's important to mention that this book at the time, we think of today of, let's say, when J.K. Rowling comes out with another book, or Stephanie Meyer, I think that's who wrote Twilight or something.
I don't think anyone's excited for her books.
No, well, there's a certain demographic group of, young people that are very excited about those books. But so bring yourself back to 1862 when Les Mis was first published, first in France. So Victor Hugo was already, at that time, he was considered some kind of cross between J.K. Rowling and Maya Angelou in France. He was not only the most famous and popular writer, but he was also sort of a philosopher and he was a poet also. And so he was highly, highly respected by basically everyone except for the government. And in fact, he lived a long portion of his life in exile. But never mind. Going back to the thing, so he had written to his publisher, and he had taken like 12 years to write Les Mis. And he said there was this big press build up to the book, and he didn't want to he told his publisher to not even tell anyone what it was about before it was released in 5 separate volumes, just like Hunger Games. How they're making that into.
They're so much alike.
Oh, so we can get into this later. I actually think that there's more alike than you think. But the idea is so that these were released over a period of time. They're amazing bestsellers, even in their day. And they actually crossed the ocean and were very popular in the United States, which was then, of course, fighting the Civil War. And both sides kind of identified with this book and with the rebels. And to the extent that if you were a little camp follower boy in the North who would carry water for the soldiers, they called them Cosettes, right? Because that's how Cosette first appears in the book, that she's carrying buckets of water, pails of water. In the South, in the Confederate States, this book was enormously popular among the troops as well, those who could read, of course. And they started calling themselves Les Miserables, for General Lee, and they would not pronouncing the French, but they would call themselves Les Miserables. So both sides identified with this. And in fact, this book would go on to become sort of a seminal work of importance to every revolutionary since then, to the extent that this book was a favorite novel of 2 people in the 20th century, Vladimir Lenin and Ayn Rand. I mean, you can.
That's fun.
You can't get 2 more opposite people, and yet it's a favorite book of both of those. So, in other words, there's something for everyone. Whether you're a radical communist or a radical capitalist, this book is for you. But what are some of the themes that it addresses, Becca?
Well, I think one of the big ones is the theme of justice. Obviously, I mean, you've got this guy following around a former convict for years. I mean, it's just gets.
And that guy
stupid.
would be Javert.
Yeah, I mean, it just gets stupid when you're thinking of the lengths that he's going to get this guy, and to what end? Like, what's the purpose?
Over basically a violation in his paperwork, that he's, Valjean at this point is a parolee who's skipped parole, gone on to have a fabulous career as a factory owner, as a mayor, and Javert still has this abiding hatred for Valjean and pursues him to the end of the earth.
And I think this is something that's really relevant. Obviously, we just got those Department of Justice reports were just released on
Right.
Ferguson, and they're saying that the problem goes deeper and the problem's bigger. And what's happening, I mean, what we see there is that people are getting nabbed for these stupid, small things
Right.
that don't matter. And it's not really just, I mean, yes, it's an application of the law, but it's not really justice. And I say the same thing is happening, you know, when Valjean goes and becomes the mayor of this town and saves people. And I mean, he really does bring a lot of jobs to the town, like sucks before he gets there.
Right.
And then after he leaves, they say like the factory closed down and everyone was destitute again.
Right,
and
right.
This is the result of chasing down one guy over a paperwork violation.
Right, right.
And
exactly.
it just shows like how, I guess in a way, like the repercussions are bigger. Like they're ripples. It's not just that, you know.
Absolutely.
I mean, especially obviously we're seeing it in Ferguson. What happened in Ferguson is affecting the nation in a big way.
And we see it, but you see it everywhere in the United States and in other countries too. I mean, we're not the only ones where this goes on. But, you know, when someone gets pinched for a minor drug violation, happens to be their third one, and they end up getting some kind of mandatory, ridiculous drug sentence and going away for 20 years. Now, it doesn't just impact that guy. It impacts his family, obviously. So suddenly there's a family that doesn't have a father. Suddenly there is a community that doesn't have someone who maybe you know, could help out the neighborhood and build up the fabric of that community, all for what is essentially a very petty violation where the consequences of putting this person away are far worse and far out of proportion than the original crime.
Yeah, and it doesn't just end. I mean, we see a lot in Valjean because he's taken for stealing a loaf of bread for his sister's children, as we discussed. But then the children, I mean, it says in the book they were just scattered to the wind. You never hear from them again. You have no idea what happened to them. So they've lost a father figure. They've lost their opportunity. But then when Valjean gets out of prison, he still can't do anything. And that's the whole reason that he broke his parole is because he was like, hey, can I have a job? And everyone was like, no, you can't have a job here. And he was like, can I have a place to sleep? And they tell him he can't have a place to sleep. He's not allowed in society. And I think we definitely see that in our society now with the way that parole works, the way that those prison sentences kind of carry around after people. You can't even vote in some states.
Well, and look what happens to Valjean because of that, because he goes out and his impulse then, because society is rejecting him. So he has no choice essentially but to turn back to crime. And so he ends up, this one bishop takes him in and treats him not just as someone to be tolerated, but actually as an honored guest and serves him dinner on his fancy silverware, you know, and silver plates and all that. And Valjean now at this time has become so cynical by the actions of society that even when shown this act of great kindness and benevolence, decides he's going to steal all of this silver. And so he does so, and he steals away in the night with all of this silver. He's caught by the police. The police bring him back, and this bishop says to him, oh, yeah, it's, you know, because obviously the cops don't believe him that
because he's a criminal, so why would you? Yeah.
And the bishop says, oh, no, I did give him that. In fact, he forgot these silver candlesticks along the way. So not only does he forgive Valjean, but he gives him something more than that. And what he says to Valjean is, I'm buying your soul for God at the end. So what? That's just okay. He does say it, but it's not practical. It's not like we can go out and like, it's great because it's this big changing moment in Valjean's. You shouldn't have your soul bought for God. Like, I think that should be a conversion that comes naturally. Sure.
But I also think like, I don't know, in a way.
But he's shown this great benevolent act, right? So he goes from basically being a man who's not wanted anywhere, who can't even find a barn to sleep in, right? To suddenly being given actually quite a bit of wealth, right? So what does he do with the silver, right?
He goes and steals from a child. Like,
he goes and steals from a child, but then
that's his conflict. That's the conversion,
you know? And so he has to decide, what kind of man am I? Now that I have this opportunity that the silver provides, what do I do? Do I turn around and, you know, stay on this path of evil, or do I turn around and do something good? And in fact, he does become something good. I forget, what is the factor he found. It's like a
It's a
pin.
jewelry factory
that's
because
right.
he talks. Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, that's good. But in order to do good and in order to be good, he has to back out of his parole.
Right.
He has to break the law to be a good person.
Exactly.
And I think that's something that if you're really a stickler, you know.
But boy, don't we see this a lot today? There are a lot of Javers in the world today.
Yes.
There are a lot of people who say that any sort of violation of the law is some kind of moral compromise. And, you know, I see this, you know, some of the examples that that we see a lot are in regard to illegal immigration, for example, or undocumented workers. Here you have people who are, and we were talking about this before the show, where you have this really, really bright and obvious line between morality and the law, where there are Miami Police Department officers who are themselves Cuban in many cases out there trying to prevent Cuban refugees from getting ashore, because once they're ashore, then they have a claim to asylum. But if they can prevent them from reaching land, then they can be sent back. You know?
Yeah.
And so here you have people who were once refugees themselves having to turn away other refugees in the most cruel and inhumane way possible. And you also see this with Latinos coming across the border in the South, where somehow some kind of administrative violation, it's not even a misdemeanor, by the way, to not have this, to enter the country illegally isn't even a misdemeanor. It's considered an administrative violation.
Oh.
Right? It's quite interesting what a non-crime it is. And so many people get worked up about the status of people's paperwork that they're willing to send these people back to a land where they're absolutely destitute. So,
yeah. And
that in itself is a moral crime. In my
that's
view.
the fight. That's, I guess, the problem with a lot of things that we consider something wrong just because it's, I don't know, because it's the way it's always been done, or because it comes from an authority figure of some kind. And Javert does qualify as an authority figure.
Sure, he's a police inspector and continues to rise in the ranks.
Yeah, he's doing really great, which is why it's surprising that he continues to go back to this. Like, you would think that at a certain point it'd just be like,
this obsession,
oh, okay.
this lifelong obsession.
And I think too that like he sees so much of the good that's happening that you wouldn't. He sees so much of the good that Valjean is doing, and he sees what destruction happens when he pushes Valjean out of all these places where he belongs.
Right.
And it doesn't matter because of this one little thing.
Right.
One little thing. And I think that's really, it's something that we see a lot. And I want to say this because I think it's important that no one watching the movie, I never heard a single person who watched the movie come out of that movie and be like, well, if Valjean had just obeyed Javert, none of this would have happened.
Right, of course. And that's
that's an argument that we're hearing a lot. So like, I mean, even
right.
So like Michael Brown should have just obeyed Darren Wilson, and none of this would have happened if Trayvon had just, left and not worried about the guy following him. None of this would have happened if
he hadn't been
this
wearing
little
a hoodie.
boy Tamara Rice had not been playing with a gun. None of this would have happened. It was a toy gun, but if he had,
right.
And it's like, yeah, but at some point we have to step back and look at the person behind the crime,
right, and the morality of it. And this book has a lot of very, I want to say it's very easy to describe them as Christian themes, but one of the reasons I think it's been so popular is that it has very humanist themes that come through time and time again. These ideas of forgiveness and of the inequities in society. And we'll get to those in a bit. But I know, Becca, you wanted to talk a little bit about the people who disappear in the book.
Because I think
what does that mean? They're
really important. The people, like I said, Valjean's family, they just, this isn't like a time now. I mean, we have Facebook now, and I'm Facebook friends with people I knew in elementary school.
Right.
That otherwise I would never talk to. And there's nothing wrong with that. I do like them. But it's just like I wouldn't keep in contact with them normally.
Right.
And I think in this time that the book was written, in the time it's set, and especially with the intense poverty, if you have to go somewhere else, unless the person that you left is like super loaded and becomes I don't know, you have no idea what happens to them.
Right. I mean, we're talking about a time when having even a last name was optional.
Yeah.
I mean, there were no ID cards. You were just who you said you were, and so you go and over time you become someone else. And that's not, and in fact, that's one of the plot points in the book is Valjean becomes other people throughout the book.
Yeah. And it's not just his family. It's like,
there's the two little boys.
The two little boys. So
example.
there's two little boys that Marius's grandfather is taking care of because it's so weird. This maid was like, "Hey, I had a kid by you," and he's like, "I don't remember that, but I'll pay."
Right.
And then she's like, they have no contact other than this money that he's giving her for like
Right.
2 years, and she's like, "Oh, you got me pregnant again," and he's like, "Okay, I'll pay for that one too." But something happens. The mother dies, and obviously, when she dies, there's no place to give the money to that's been, and they're roaming the streets, and Gavroche finds them, and he spends a day with them and takes care of them. But then, after that day is over, I mean, you never hear about them again, and you don't. I mean, obviously, they're going to be street urchins. They're going to be street children if they survive to 12 or 15. Good on them, but odds are high they're gonna
exactly
die.
They're either going to die or end up in prison by that age, And I mean, we are talking about a time when child criminals, even petty criminals, were often routinely executed and hanged or given lengthy prison sentences for what today they would be sent to juvie for
yeah,
example.
and they have to survive somehow,
right? Of
but
course.
there's nothing in place
Eating
that says
isn't optional. Right.
Yeah, there's nothing in place that protects them. There's no safety net. It's not like anyone's going to show up at the house and be like, "Oh, look at these two little boys."
What's interesting though is that Victor Hugo doesn't ever answer the question about what happens to these people.
Yeah.
And readers have wondered for 150 years whether or not this was a mistake on his part, whether he meant to go tie up those loose strings or if that was done on purpose. What is your take on that?
So at first I was like, well, clearly he should have gone back and told us what happened because they're children. I think you like automatically go for like their children.
You worry about the welfare.
Yeah, but then you look at everything else, like especially the town, like when Valjean leaves the town and the factory goes down, that's all those people are scattered to the wind too. We have no idea what happens to them. The town just becomes destitute and sad, and it's just about I think part of that is like the immediacy of poverty. You can't worry about what's going to happen to those two little boys because what's going to happen next is how you're going to eat is more important.
Right.
So we can't worry about what happened to those two little boys because Gavroche is about to die in the barricade, and there's a revolution on, and people don't know when they're going to eat, and Eponine's going to die in the barricades as well, and it's just.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the revolution and the barricades because that forms an important, actually central part to the plot of the story. And I think so. There's this widely held misconception out there that the revolution in question is the French Revolution.
Yeah, not right.
No, not right at all. And then still other people believe that it was the student rebellions, which are somewhat less famous, of 1848, and those are wrong as well. It's actually this brief student revolution that happened in July of 1832. Now, the French are very, very good at a number of things, making wine and wonderful baguettes, and also protesting the hell out of anything that comes along. It seems like every time that you go to Paris, there's always a taxi strike going on or people in the streets chanting about something. But at the time, after the French Revolution, the reforms that were enacted never lasted very long. And before long, they were back to having a monarchy or some version of a monarchy. And the growing middle class, what Marx would later call the bourgeoisie, was very discontented with this. And so those people that were educated tended to from time to time rise up in revolt, and that's sort of the setting of this sort of nascent republicanism in France in the 1820s and 30s, which kind of comes to a very horrific end in 1832 with this brief spark of a revolution that actually never quite takes hold. The revolution is over It was just a brief flare-up, and it lasted less than a month. And in fact, this one lasted. This part of it only lasted a day. And Victor Hugo was actually there. He was writing a play in a park when he heard the gunfire at this uprising and left, and was actually caught in the crossfire and was hiding in this sort of entryway between two buildings as the government soldiers were fighting the rebels. So his knowledge of this, you can clearly see that this was a very formative experience for him.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's important that it fails. It failed.
Right.
They're kids, and
College kids.
Yeah, and this revolution just. I think it's interesting the way it's set up in the book, because Enjolras is he has such a spirit in him, and he really is a charismatic character who leads the other characters on.
He is. Hugo describes him in a very odd way. He describes him as looking like a 17-year-old girl. I just want to read this part. He said he has long, fair lashes, blue eyes, hair flying in the wind, rosy cheeks, pure lips, and exquisite teeth. These are all ways that Hugo describes Enjolras, or however you want to pronounce it. But he's very much this sort of rebel leader, and he's very
also
passionate.
Beautiful.
Right. He's physically beautiful. He's like this Adonis, of this. And so he's very, very charismatic. He can be violent at times, but only to there's this line that he says, he goes, "Death, I use thee, but I hate thee." And it's very, and one of the things that we need to mention is that if this all sounds a bit melodramatic, it's because it is melodramatic. And Hugo was even criticized for this at the time. Baudelaire and Flaubert both kind of rejected the novel as saying that it's all kind of hokey,
Oh yeah. I mean,
it's hokey in a good way.
Well, yes and no, because I think, and I guess I'm going to jump because I guess in a way it's relevant, but Cosette and Marius are not people that you want to, like, I would want Enjolras to win because he's so idealistic and great. But like Marius kind of spends most of the book like moping around. I mean, when the revolution starts, he's like in the river, like, maybe I should just kill myself.
Right, he's a goth kid.
I don't know what's happening. My
Yeah.
girlfriend doesn't care about me.
Right.
And then what's interesting is that Cosette kind of throughout the book, she's denied a lot of agent. I guess you don't hear a lot about it because everything's happening on everybody else's level. Like Marius has this whole drama with his grandfather. Her adopted dad, Valjean, is dealing with the Javert lunatic.
Right.
So you don't really get a chance to see Cosette in action. And then when you finally do, she is just so stupid and shallow. and I don't even know how she was taught by these nuns for months, and she just ends up like vacant and like it's so.
So are you saying that she's not a sympathetic character? Cosette is?
No, I mean she is on like a basic human level, but.
See, I think she and Marius are both pure innocents, right? But in the most drippy, awful way possible.
That's it. It's drippy and awful, and that's the problem. That it's drippy and awful, and that they're so daft and stupid. Like you just but then they succeed because that's really what it is. So the revolution fails, and all these boys die, and it's
fails
sad.
in a spectacular way, and I think that this bears some going into because it's really, really interesting. I mean, to me, this is really the meat and potatoes of the story.
But after the revolution fails, and we will go into then Marius and Cosette, like Dopey and Dopette, get to get all this money from his grandfather and from Valjean, and they get to have this really nice life. And aren't things great? And no one ever discusses revolution again because now they're comfortable and happy, and they're
man, I think that's really the point of the thing, though. That here they have this money, and now they're in a position where they can afford to never have this discussion again. And isn't that tragic?
Yes.
It's tragic for their souls. It's tragic for the world.
Yes.
Okay? But they were never hardcore revolutionaries to begin with.
No, which is why it sucks that those guys, the guys who were, died.
I mean, nowadays Marius would go to dental school or something, and Cosette would, get her CPA degree, and then they'd buy an Escalade and a giant screen TV. and it's terrible.
I feel like they'd be more. I feel like Marius would have a lot of inherited wealth and be like
Collect
he'd be
art.
Yeah, and he'd be like, if people want things, they need to work for them, even though he
Right.
hasn't worked a day in his life, and because that would do philanthropic work that's really not very philanthropic.
He would dress up in a tuxedo and go to charity galas.
Yeah,
call it
and-
charity.
Yeah.
So, but I want to go back to the revolution.
Yes.
Because, boy, is this so cool. It is so interesting. So here you have this firebrand Enjolras, and all of the in the musical, this is all kind of glossed over, but all of the revolutionaries who are significant are, have actual characters that develop. And one of the more interesting ones is Grantaire. Grantaire is a drunk. And he is sort of a hangers-on. He loves to hang out with Enjolras. And in my view, he represents, if Enjolras is this sort of great firebrand, speaker, ideologue, Grantaire is the cynic, and he's a drunk, and he thinks nothing's ever going to get better. And he hangs out with Enjolras basically because
He's
it's
in love
too
with
hard,
him.
because he's in right. So this is right now. This is so in doing our research, I actually uncovered. I have to.
Go ahead.
No, I
Talk
have to
about
say
it.
So I make the mistake, just like everything on the Google. I look up what people have to say about the relationship between Enjolras and Grantaire. Holy cow! There's this whole world of fanfic gay porn out there that describes their romance and their sex that they have together. And the name of the site, I gotta say
because
what
it's
it is,
awesome.
Becca. Say what it is.
It's Hugo turning in his grave.
No, making Hugo spin.
Making Hugo spin.
It's so fantastic.
And I feel like that's more to do with the quality of the writing, because I feel like there were a lot of homoerotic undertones between Grantaire and Enjolras, but
be that as it may,
the writing for these websites is incredibly poor. It's
incredibly.
It's not
but
quality.
That's you
writing.
get that when it comes to fanfic. It's just a shame that it happens here. I mean, look at the most famous example of fanfic, which is of course 50 Shades of Grey, which started off as a spin-off of Twilight. Anyway, I digress too far. But I want to mention this. There's this great, very poignant moment at the end after the revolution fails, and Enjolras says to all of the men at the barricade, he said, if you have women and children at home, go, leave. There's no point. This is all a futile effort. Okay. The soldiers break through the barricade, and Grantaire is knocked out, and he's lying there on the upper floor of the
Passed
shop.
out because he drank too much.
Well, right, but he's also wounded, isn't he?
No,
right. He's
so
such
the
a
first
drunk,
night
right.
they've set up the barricade, and then
that's
they
right.
throw a party, and Grantaire gets
As one
so
does at the
wasted.
barricade, right,
Yeah, they're
yeah.
like, "Yeah, we're totally gonna win the revolution," and then they just get really shit faced, and Grantaire, because that's his nature, takes it 5 steps further than everyone else, and he's passed out. So in the movie, because he's in the movie,
Yeah.
and he when Marius first sees Cosette and rushes into the room to talk about how in love he is, Grantaire's the one who's egging him on because he thinks it's hilarious that Marius is all caught up in love. And then at the very end, he does show up, and they leave out this line, "Do you permit me?"
Yes.
I believe is the one that you were gonna.
Yes.
Yeah, because. So what happens is Grantaire.
So Enjolras is about to be executed.
Yeah, and Grantaire has drunk so much that he's passed out, and they put him upstairs in this room, and everyone else is dead. But then all of a sudden, the soldiers come up, and Grantaire wakes up. They don't notice he's there, so he could just walk away.
He looks like just another dead body.
Yeah, he could walk away, but instead he gets up and goes. And it's a great moment because, in the book, there's a time when Enjolras sends Grantaire off to get people, and when he finds Grantaire, he's playing checkers and drinking with people and not talking about revolution at all, and it's really upsetting.
But when Enjolras is about to be executed,
Yeah.
Grantaire wakes up and he sees what's about to happen, and he says, he says to Enjolras, "Do you permit me? Do you permit me to die with you?" And Enjolras holds his hand, and the two men are shot by this firing squad of French government troops,
And
they
that's
die. And I think, if I remember right, because the movie and the musical get this wrong, where Enjolras is sort of splayed out along the top of the barricade because he doesn't die there. But in the book, he doesn't fall. He remains standing. after he's shot
Oh,
for some time. It's
okay.
very dramatic. I mean, and this is where we get to that heart of the melodrama, right? So,
Mm.
so if you are reading this with a non-cynical eye, if you are, let's say, a young 16-year-old Union or Confederate soldier, and you're reading about this stuff, like, boy, this is really getting to the heart of the drama that you're living every day, and it's setting an example, really, for revolutionaries for another 150 years.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
That-
yeah.
that,
I mean, on some
to
level, it's
passionately martyr
obviously
yourself for the
being
cause.
yeah, but
Yeah,
it's obviously
ridiculous.
being twisted.
Incredibly
so.
romanticized, let's go back to Valjean for a second, because what does he do during this revolution?
Well, in the movie, what he does is he shows up, and when they're deciding people to leave, he comes and takes place and says, "I'll stand with you tonight,"
Right.
and lets someone else go home in his stead because they're deciding who will leave, based on who has family, because they
But
kind
he
of know
knows
everyone's
at
going to
this
die.
point that Marius and Cosette, his
Yeah,
daughter, are in love.
he's figured it out, and so he comes. And in the movie, of course, he sings right by Marius's head while Marius is trying to take a nap. In the
Bring him home. The
yeah,
big-
it's so loud, and he doesn't wake up, and you have to. There's a lot of singing in that barricade that's like really weird. If you're watching the movie, you're like, that's
suspension
weird that
of
they're
disbelief.
singing.
It's a musical.
right now.
Come on, cut it a little slack.
Okay,
But-
but
so-
anyway, he's there, and he sees Marius go down. Basically,
Marius is wounded.
Marius is wounded,
Right.
and he carries Marius through the sewers of Paris, and
But let's not forget the whole Javert twist to that whole thing.
Oh, yeah, he lets Javert
is at
go.
so Javert, prior to this happening with Marius, Javert is at the barricades as a police spy and is identified as such. And Valjean says, and everyone wants to execute him, of course, just put him up against the wall and have a firing squad. And Valjean says, this guy has been pursuing me my entire life. Will you please allow me to do the honor? And so they say, oh, yeah, fine. So he takes him into an alley and pretends to execute him. But in fact, Valjean cuts him loose and says, get out of here, go, I'm forgiving you, just as that, this grand act of forgiveness. So then when Javert comes, so as Valjean is going through the sewers, carrying the wounded Marius, and remember, like, he is literally, Valjean and Marius are up to their necks, literally in feces, human feces, going through the sewer. Who appears but Javert? He wants to arrest him
at the
because,
very end,
God
yeah.
forbid he cut him some slack for like 2 hours. But then Javert has this revelation, and what happens, Becca?
So Valjean gets out of the sewer covered in feces, and he's like, look, I've got to take this kid to... It's not like the movie where he's like, I'm just going to walk away, which was kind of badass. But he's like, I've got... It was a really great moment where Javert's like, stop you. And Hugh Jackman's like, no. And he just like keeps walking. And it's
turn
kind
my
of
back to your
like
gun.
awesome.
Yeah, right.
But instead he's like, look, I've got to take this kid. And in this moment of... this is really where Javert starts realizing, like, oh, I really screwed up. Like, he's like,
Not only that, he screwed up his entire life.
Yeah. He's like, I've just let me take this kid to his grandfather and let me just get this done.
Right.
So they take a carriage together, Javert and Valjean, to the grandfather's house, drop off Marius. And then I believe it's while Valjean is like in the house trying to, Javert is just like, drive on. And they drive back to he just leaves him there. And they drive back to he alone drives back to the police station, hands in his resignation, and then kills himself.
Right.
Shoots himself.
And he compares himself in the book, he compares himself to Pontius Pilate, and this idea of having followed the law, but not followed what was morally right. And
Not knowing the difference.
And not knowing the difference.
Can I tell you something? There's a big reason why I like Les Mis and why I wanted to talk about it was because I got into like one of those stupid online arguments you shouldn't get into with this guy I used to know like forever. And he's a lawyer, but he's like I won't say crappy. He's like the bad lawyer. It's like the ambulance chaser lawyers.
Right.
But then we were discussing something and he was like, he was telling me he knows more about justice than I do because he went to law school and I was just a lowly English major. Right. And I feel like Les Mis is the book that proves that this is all just, I'm like Javert in this situation. Right. I'm just the one who wants to prove the petty point that, in fact, English majors know quite a bit about justice. So,
Indeed.
So don't bring that stuff on me. But yeah, his argument was that he knew more about justice because he'd been to law school, which is brilliant. You know more about the law, but justice and the law are two different things. And I think that's the crux of this book, that justice and the law are two completely different things.
Right. Absolutely. So I wanted to bring this up because, we've lived with this book now for something like over 150 years.
Yeah.
And for 150 years, it's been very, very popular among those people who want to see radical social change. And so my question is, do you think a revolution like they had, the student revolt, is possible now?
It is and it isn't. I mean, when Occupy happened, I got like really, really involved in Occupy. And here's the thing, like, these guys planned it and they thought it out and they set up a barricade and they knew what they were willing to risk to get. And I think one of the big problems is that in the United States, we're kind of at this, I mean, there's a lot of things that suck, but we're kind of at a very comfortable level and there aren't a lot of people willing to risk a lot. Not only that, there's not, so proper steps aren't being taken. Like, if you want to fight the government over something, your first step is to go to the government and say, hey, this is what I'd like to change. So what I saw at Occupy was we had this opportunity to go to the government and say, these are the things we'd like to change. And there was this kind of anarchist contingent that was like, no, we're just going to break shit today. And so,
right.
Which is great, but you're not going to achieve anything. Like, unless their goal was more destroy the entire government than change it. And I think you have to start by attempting to change it. And obviously when you have a monarchy, that's a little different. But we have the ability to elect. I mean, like, we can go and talk to our elected officials, especially here in Denver. We can go and talk to our elected officials at any time.
Right.
You're allowed to
it's
do that.
Accessible.
Yeah, and that's accessible for. You're allowed to send emails. You're allowed to call offices. You can harass them as much as you want, honestly.
That said, you're not going to get. I mean, I can't speak for all of the Occupy protesters there, but part of their nascent inchoate plan that they had brought forward was things like forgiving all student debt, things like that. Something that the governor or the mayor would not have any power to do.
Well, yeah, there was a civics problem, like a small problem with the understanding of how civics, the government actually functions. Because I remember somebody saying they were going to go talk to the mayor and then walking towards the state capitol, and I had to like stop them and be like, no, if you want to talk to the mayor, he's in the other direction. Right. And I remember they were once like, we should ask the mayor for permission to be in Lincoln Park, which if you're listening somewhere else and you're not from Denver, Lincoln Park is a state park. So the mayor would probably be like, yeah, go hang out and leave Civic Center Park, the city park. Right. Go to Lincoln Park. Good move. But so, like a small misunderstanding of how government works too. And I think the point with Occupy was that you want to change the big federal government, and it starts at a smaller, more local scale.
Fair enough.
But I think that the solution isn't jumping around in this. Like, the solution isn't breaking stuff. The solution isn't doing that stuff. It starts small, and these guys, they were angry enough to die for it, and I don't think you were going to find enough people who were like, "Oh yeah, I'm just going to die for this,"
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Especially when many of them weren't sure exactly what they wanted in the first place, and their iPhone batteries were running low. So, sorry, didn't mean.
Yeah, well, I know
something out.
When you have to go charge your iPhone, that like throws when you're like
that throws the whole thing
you're
off,
like,
doesn't it?
Screw the police, and then
oh, wait,
like
I'm at 10%.
They're like, wait, but I gotta get behind the barricade because that's where you guys have the power outlet. So,
I'm gonna politely disagree with you on a theoretical level here.
Okay.
Now, I'm not advocating for this, of course. I'm just saying this: that if their protest demonstrations and so forth, you are operating within a valve for civic discontent that is permitted by the state. Okay, that the state allows this kind of thing, and so long as you're not breaking shit, you're going to be permitted to do that, okay? So the cops will stand politely by, and you can vouch for this, at least in Occupy Denver, that the cops were rather polite to you, weren't they? That they couldn't...
There were a lot of issues, and we've got like 5 minutes left.
Right. But my point is this, right? So you
Yeah.
look at Ferguson versus you look at Occupy, right? Why in Ferguson did the Justice Department step in? Why did the police chief resign? Why did the chief executive of Ferguson resign? Why did the Justice Department on a federal level step in? It wasn't because there were peaceful protests. It's because there were riots. And it was because they were showing that, look, we can threaten this structure that you've established, that we have the power to do that. And nobody wanted that. And so the state reached out to them and reached a compromise and actually did something.
Actually, I would say that more so than the riots, the peaceful protests that were happening. What they did in San Francisco, shutting down the BART, that was incredible.
Right, but
when
again,
they shut down the highway in Boston, that was amazing. They did it in D.C. I think they did it in Miami.
Yes,
it
but
was
again, they're breaking the law.
Yes, but it was organized and structured, and I think that's the difference between that and what happened in Occupy, where they were just like, we're just going to break stuff. It's like, no, go in. Do you want to get arrested? Oh, you don't really want to get arrested? Well, then we don't have a foot to stand on. But we're out of time. We're
getting there.
Yeah, and so we've got to talk about what's happening next time. And so we are getting there. We have like 4 minutes left. And so in this 4 minutes, we have to talk about some business and stuff. So we're doing The Monk next time. The Monk by Matthew Lewis. It's a Gothic novel, so it should be a lot of drama and a lot of fun. So that's really exciting. And then also, we've just got like general us stuff. We're on iTunes.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
iTunes.
We're on iTunes. You can like us on Facebook, facebook.com/Bibliophilia podcast.
Right.
We are on Twitter at Bibliopod.
Bibliopod.
Wait, no, Bibliophilia Pod. Bibliophilia Pod.
Bibliophilia Pod.
And then we are on Patreon at patreon.com/Bibliophilia.
So I'd also like to say in closing that this podcast is brought to you by Coca-Cola and computers. No, we're not actually. That was a lie.
Yeah.
So why don't you maybe tell people how that they can support this,
So there are a few ways to support us because we do need sponsors. So if you are listening to this point, you obviously like us. So just sponsor us.
So fantastic. We love doing this.
That's one thing. And then the Patreon, you can get on Patreon and you can pledge like $1 or $2 per show. And that's kind of a fun way because it's not a lot. Like $1 a week is not a lot. You tip the guy at Starbucks $1 every day. So just tip us like $1 per week.
Just $1.
And then
50 cents.
Those are ways to support us. And then just generally letting people know that we exist, subscribing on iTunes, going on the Facebook page and clicking like, and we try and post interesting things. If you like really punny memes, that's what we did leading up to Les Mis. Really punny
memes. We'll do our best
things.
To bring more punny memes going forward.
We kind of try and post things that are relevant to what we've talked about. And next time, like I said, we're talking about The Monk, so we're posting some stuff about what it means to have a Gothic novel. Would you qualify Les Mis as a Gothic novel?
Oh, no. I would say it's a high romanticism.
Yeah. Gothic with castles.
Castles, yes. We're talking... Is it Bronte territory, Gothic?
We're going to do Bronte actually after... Okay, so after The Monk, then we're going to do a Bronte block. And they are pretty Gothic.
Bronte block.
We're going to talk about these Brontes. So
the
we're going to do
Brontes.
Jane Eyre. And then the next week we're doing Wuthering Heights. And then the week after that we're doing The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, which is Anne's. And Anne had kind of a different perspective than her sisters.
I'm so not into that.
Okay, well then you won't be here. So Scott will not be here for those days.
That's not my shtick.
I'll be here, and so
Becca will be here.
We'll join you next week.
Special guests, I'm
we
sure.
Will.
So thank you very much, everyone. It's been a pleasure. Go out, get a copy of Les Mis, read it, and if you don't, then just watch the movie. It's
read the
really
book.
Fantastic.
Read the book. All right.
Adios.
That's it. Thank you.
Au revoir.
Bye.